So Camilla is living in a house that legally doesn't belong to her anymore, and the only reason anyone found out is because William actually reads the paperwork. That's the story. Not a fight, not a leaked email, not some screaming match in a palace corridor, a land registry page with 2 names on it, and neither of them is hers. And when you trace back how that page got changed and when it got changed, the whole thing stops being about real estate and starts being about something way more uncomfortable. Before we get into it, if you like stories where the receipts do the talking, hit subscribe to my channel. We dig into the stuff that gets quietly corrected a week later. So, let's rewind because this starts way before any of the current drama. It starts in 1996. Camilla is not royal. She's not even close. She's a divorced woman in her late 40s. 2 grown kids, a name the British press used like a punchline. Her divorce from Andrew Parker BS had just gone. That house was the one place on earth where nobody could tell her what to do. No palace scheduler, no press officer, no protection team deciding who comes through the door. She could stand in her own kitchen with wet hair and a cigarette and be nobody's problem for an afternoon. Every royal correspondent has written some version of that same soft sentence about it. Her bolt hole, her sanctuary, the place he goes to be normal, sweet, harmless, human. But here's the thing I kept coming back to. A house like that does not stay yours by accident. Once you become queen, somebody has to decide every single year that it stays outside the formal arrangements. Somebody has to sign things. Somebody has to keep it insured, staffed, repaired, paid for, and the money for all of that has to come from somewhere and be recorded. And the moment you start pulling on that thread, the sweet little story about the sanctuary gets a lot less sweet. The property beside Ray Mill House, an old mill in the same stretch of water, came up for sale. Charles paid for it out of his own pocket. British papers put the figure at around £3 million. The reason given at the time was privacy. The building was going to be turned into a wedding venue. Events, hire cars coming up the lane, music carrying across the water on a Saturday night, strangers with drinks standing in a garden that looks straight at his wife's windows. So the king bought it. £3 million to stop a wedding venue. And when I first read that, I filed it under the same soft heading everybody else did. Devoted husband protects wife's privacy. Lovely. Next story. But then I sat with it, and it stopped sitting right, because a man in his 70s who owns Sandringham and Balmoral outright, who has Highgrove down the road, who has more square miles of Britain attached to his name than almost any private landowner you could name, does not usually spend £3 million of personal money to fix a noise problem at a house that is not his. That is a decision about somebody else's asset. You spend that kind of money to protect a property when the value of that property matters to you or when the person who owns it has told you it matters to them very much. And here's the thing I keep turning over. The king bought the neighbor to protect the house. He did not buy the house. He could have at any point in 20 years quietly at a fair price and the whole thing folds into the estate and stops being a question forever. That's what this behalf of a wife whose name was on a page he had every right to look at. And from what I can piece together, had not looked at in years. And I've gone looking for any sign that he tried, a refused offer, a family row about it, one line in somebody's memoir about the king wanting the Wiltshire house brought inside the arrangements and being told no. There's nothing there. No refusal, no argument, no trace of the question ever being put to anybody. A house sat outside the property arrangements of the British monarchy for 20 years. And as far as anybody has ever written down, nobody in that household asked out loud why. That's the first crack. Now, somewhere in the last stretch, that registry page changed. Land registry records for Ray Mill House now carry 2 names and neither of them is hers. One belongs to her son-in-law, the other belongs to a financier, a man with no royal connection at all whose job is looking after other people's money. Those 2 are understood to be acting on behalf of her children, Tom and Laura. Sources close to the Queen say the change formalizes family arrangements and keeps the house private rather than commercial. Read that sentence again, because press offices choose words the way surgeons choose knives. Formalizes family arrangements. In plain English, it means this: the house Camilla bought with her divorce money in 1996. The one house in that woman's life that was hers alone no longer has her name on the ownership page. It sits under the names of two men acting for her children. She still lives there. She still walks the dogs there. She will die in that house if she gets her way. But on paper, it has already gone past her and landed on the other side where the crown cannot follow it and the crown cannot claim it. And that's not illegal. Let me be clear. Families with money do this constantly. Any decent solicitor in the country would tell you it's sensible. Move the asset while you're well, and the tax people take less of it later. Perfectly ordinary. Ordinary for a private family, but this is not a private family because there's a second question sitting underneath, and it's the one that gave me 2 bad nights, and it's the question this whole video is about. The paperwork is done. The names are on it. The arrangements are formalized. Somebody had to tell the king. Now, nobody has confirmed what was said inside that marriage, and I wouldn't insult you by pretending otherwise, but I can put the timeline in front of you and let you watch what people did because actions leave marks that statements never do. And the marks here are ugly. Follow it with me. The king spends £3 million of his own money in 2025 to protect the value in the piece of a house in Wiltshire. That is a man behaving like the house matters to him, like the house is part of the shape of his life. Around that same stretch of time, the ownership page of that same house is being rearranged so that the house belongs in every way the law recognizes to her children. Both of those things can be true and innocent. Sure, and a man can also write a very large check to protect something he has already been quietly written out of. And this is where William comes in because this is exactly the shape of the thing that has been driving him for 25 years. Diana's whole ending, the part William watched from the inside as a boy, was about arrangements made around her instead of with her. Decisions taken in rooms she was not in. Papers signed by people who spoke about her in the third person while she was still in the building. Her title handled, her security handled, her position handled. All of it done properly, all of it done politely, and none of it done in front of her. That is the wound. The paperwork moved while she was still standing there. William was 15 when he walked behind her coffin in a dark suit with his head down and half the world watching. Whatever else that boy took out of that week, he took out a very particular allergy. He cannot stand it when the documents say one thing or the family says another. He has spent his adult life pulling files, checking who signed what, asking who was in the room. Every person who has worked near him says a version of the same thing. He reads the paperwork himself. So when I tell you that William got hold of a file about a house in Wiltshire, I need you to understand that this was not a man being nosy about his stepmother's property. This was a man checking whether it was happening again. And here's how a file like that reaches a man like him. It's far less dramatic than you're imagining. Nobody breaks into anything. Nobody slides an envelope under a door at midnight. In a household that size, property questions travel through the people who handle property. And those people write things down because writing things down is the only way anybody survives working for that family for longer than a year. A query goes out about insurance on a private property in Wiltshire. A second query goes out about who signs for the work on the roof. Somebody in an office in London opens the registry page to answer the question properly, prints it, puts it in a folder with everything else that came in that week, and the folder goes up the line. That is all the system did, what the system does, and the page landed in front of a man who reads pages. From what I can put together, William did not go looking for that house. The house came to him inside a routine folder about maintenance costs, and he opened it the way you open a gas bill. And then he stopped, and he went back to the top of the page and he read the 2 names again. Neither of them was hers. Neither of them was his father's. Sit with what that afternoon was like. He is a man who has spent his whole adult life being told that the arrangements are being handled. He has heard that sentence in every register a British voice can produce. And here is a page telling him that a house his father spent £3 million protecting had already been handed onward in law to 2 men acting for the children of a previous marriage that ended before he was old enough to read. He did not shout. Everybody who knows him says the same thing about him under pressure. He gets quiet and he gets slow, and he starts asking for the next document. And the next document is where it stops being tie. What came back was not 1 page. It was a run of them going back years. Invoices for work at the property, payments for a garden wall, for a roof, for a heating system, for a run of fencing along a lane, insurance renewals, a schedule of contents, and running through those papers appearing and disappearing and appearing again. A set of arrangements that had been quietly renewed year after year without ever once being put in front of the man who was paying for a large part of it. Insiders say the phrase that came back from the office when somebody finally asked the obvious question out loud was that the king had been kept comfortable. Kept comfortable. That is how it gets described. When a household decides a man does not need to be troubled with the detail, he signs what he is given. He is told the matter is in hand. Everybody protects him from the paperwork, and he thanks them for it, because he is in his 70s. He has been treated for cancer in front of the whole country, and he has a diary of engagements to get through with a smile on his face. You can call that kindness if you want to. I have watched this family long enough to know that in that house, kindness and management wear the same coat. There is a renewal in that run of papers, one of the dull annual ones, and it carries a note in the margin in somebody's handwriting. The king need not be troubled with this, need not be troubled. A head of state, a man who has signed treaties and opened parliaments, and a member of his own staff writing in the margin of a page about his wife's house that he need not be troubled with it. Nobody meant any harm by that line, and that is what makes it worse. Somebody wrote it kindly on a wet Tuesday and filed it, and then the filing carried on for years. Now, William did not send the file to lawyers. He took it to his aunt, and the reason he took it to Anne is the reason this story ends the way it ends. He knew what would happen if it went the official route. It would be handled, it would be reviewed, it would be noted. Somebody would use the word appropriate 4 times in a paragraph, and the file would come back 6 weeks later with a recommendation that no further action was required, and his father would never see a single page of it. That is the machine. That machine ate his mother and read it in one sitting. Sources suggest she asked exactly 2 questions, and the second one was whether the king had ever been given a copy. The answer was no, so she drove herself down. That detail is the detail no convoy, no press call, no advance notice to the household, just a Land Rover on a Wednesday, and a woman in a headscarf who has been driving herself around the west of England since before most of us were born. The gate at Ray Mill House is set well back from the lane. You cannot see the front of the house from the road, which was always the point of it. She came up the drive, parked badly, took a green folder off the passenger seat, and knocked on a private door in a private house that no longer on paper belonged to the woman who answered it. No aides, no officials, no note-taker. That is important because it changes what happened next in a way the household did not expect. The kitchen at Ray Mill House is not a grand room, low ceiling, a long scrub table, dogs on a bed in the corner, a cooker that has been there longer than the marriage. That is the room where this happened. Camilla made tea, 2 cups. She has never in her life let anybody else make it in that kitchen. Anne put the green folder on the table and did not open it straight away. She asked after the dogs. She asked after Tom. She let a silence run longer than a silence is meant to run, which is a thing she does, and which people who know her find almost unbearable. Then she opened it. The first thing out of that folder was the registry page. 1 sheet, 2 names printed near the bottom, a son-in-law and a financier acting for 2 adult children, and turned it around so it faced the right way for the woman opposite her, and put 1 finger on the line where her name should have been and was not. Camilla did not pretend she had never seen it. Give her that much. She said it had been done properly, that solicitors had handled all of it, that this is what people do with a house when they are sensible, that it changes nothing about how anybody lives. Anne said, "I know what it changes. I want to know who was told." The second thing out of the folder was the run of payments. Years of them work on the roof of a house that was moving out of one set of hands and into another, paid for through arrangements that traced back at the end of every chain to the king's own money. A wall, a boiler, a stretch of fencing along the lane so the dogs could run without going near the road. Small things, ordinary things, thousands of pounds at a time, hundreds of thousands over a decade, all of it landing on a property that had been quietly promised elsewhere. And Camilla said the thing that everybody in her position says, and it is the most honest sentence in this entire story. She said he has never once asked. That is true, by the way. I believe her completely. Charles does not ask. He is a man who has had money handled for him since he was a child, who has never carried a wallet in his life, who signs where the little pencil cross goes and moves on to the next thing because there are 11 more things that afternoon. The whole careers in that household have been built on the fact that he does not ask. Anne knows that better than anybody alive. She grew up next to it. She said that is not the same as him knowing. Then the third thing came out of the folder. It was a dated page, a record of when the ownership arrangements were put in motion, signed and witnessed, with the month sitting there in black type at the top of it. And the month was before the king wrote his check for the mill next door, before the £3 million of his own money went out to buy a neighboring building so that no wedding party would ever spoil the view from those windows. Take a second with that. The house had already been moved. The names were already going onto the page. The arrangements were already in that beautiful word formalized. And then the King of the United Kingdom in his 70s, in the middle of treatment, reached into his own pocket and spent £3 million protecting the value and the piece of a property that his wife had already signed onward to her children. He believed he was protecting their home. What he was doing was topping up somebody else's inheritance and thanking the room for the chance to help. Anne looked at the date, and then she looked up and she said the sentence that this whole story lives on. She said he was never told. Nobody sat him down for it over dinner or in a car between two engagements where these people do most of their real talking. A man had signed away £3 million to protect something he no longer had any part of, and the woman across the table had let him do it. Camilla did not deny it. She said, "I have to think about my children." And you know what? That is a real answer. It is not a good one, but it is real. Her children have no titles. They have no allowances. They have no houses waiting for them. No duce, no estate, no line of succession with their names anywhere on it. The day Charles dies and he is not a Wellman. The doors close, William becomes king, Catherine becomes queen, and Tom and Laura become two middle-aged people who used to be photographed at Christmas. Every single thing their mother has, she holds because she is married to a man in his late 70s who has been treated for cancer in public. She has watched this family absorb property her whole adult life. She knows exactly how it works. If that house is still in her name on the day he dies, it becomes a question for the household, and the household will handle it. And handling it means committees and lawyers and a story in the papers about the widow's private property. If it is already gone, it is already gone. The way she reads it, she was getting her children out of the building before the door shut. And here is the cruelty of it. That is exactly what Diana was trying to do at the end. Diana spent the last 2 years of her life trying to make sure her boys would have things that were hers rather than the institution's. Letters, jewelry, a list of items for the people she loved, all of it written down, all of it arranged, all of it done because she had learned the hard way that this family absorbs everything. And then explains afterwards that it was always theirs. 2 women 30 years apart in different houses doing the same frightened arithmetic about their sons. The difference is who got to keep the paperwork. Anne left before the light went. She took the folder with her and she left one sheet on the table face up, which is the most Anne thing in this entire account. She did not need to say anything else. She left the page where the tea had been, then she drove to see her brother. I have thought about that drive more than any other part of this. An hour and a bit of country road. A woman in her 70s who has spent 50 years, never once, making a family problem into a public one, working out how to tell a man with a serious illness that his wife's house has already gone past him, that the money he spent protecting it went into somebody else's pocket, and that his own household knew the order events and kept him comfortable. She told him in a small sitting room with the door shut, no private secretary, no note-taker, her rule, not his. The people who were in the building that evening say the king did not raise his voice. He asked her to show him the dated page, and he read it, and then he read it again, and then he put it down on the table and looked out of the window for a long time without saying anything at all. Somebody brought tea in and took it out again untouched. Sources close to that evening suggest he asked one question, and it was not about money. He asked how long the household had known. Nobody wanted to answer that one. I am not going to sell you a scene where a king throws a lamp. He is not built that way, but I can tell you what changed afterwards because changes leave paperwork. Within weeks, the private office that handled the wheelchair property stopped handling it. The review pulled every maintenance arrangement that had run for years on a nod and a renewal into writing. Payments for work on that house came off the king's side of the ledger and went where they belonged, which is to the people whose names sit on the register. Nobody announced it, nobody had to, and that is where the small scene happened that I cannot get out of my head. Late summer, a weekday, the gate at the end of that long Wiltshire drive. New arrangements mean new access lists. A new access list means a man on a clipboard, and the man on the clipboard is 26 years old and doing his job properly for the first week in a new post. A car comes up the lane. The Queen is in it, coming back from an appointment, sitting in the back, the way she always does. And the young man checks his list. He is not being cruel. He has been handed a sheet with the registered owners and the authorized names on it, and told to work through it properly because the arrangements have changed and everything now goes through the people whose names are on the page. He runs his finger down it looking for the name he expects to find at the top, and it is not at the top, and it is not in the middle, and he goes back up and starts again while the car sits there with the engine running. She watched him do it through the glass from the back seat at the gate of the house she bought in 1996 with her own money. The one place in the world that was hers while a boy who was not born when she bought it looked for her name on a list and could not find it. He found it eventually further down under a heading about permitted occupants. The gate opened. She said nothing to the driver. That evening she did not come out again. Permitted occupant in the house she chose the curtains for. The young man on the gate has no idea what he did. He went home that evening and told nobody because from where he was standing, nothing had happened at all. A car waited 40 seconds longer than usual while he worked through a sheet somebody had handed him. That is the thing about paperwork with teeth. It does the damage through people who were being perfectly polite. Now, let me bring William back because he had been quiet for a fortnight. And quiet is what he does before he moves. He did not go to the press. He moved slower than that and much harder to argue with. He asked for the same review to be run across every private arrangement inside both households, every property, every renewal, every payment made on behalf of somebody whose name was not on the paperwork. He wanted it written down, and he wanted it dated, and he wanted a copy to sit with his father rather than with the office. Insiders say the sentence he used was from now on he sees his own papers. That is the punishment, if you want to call it one. No titles removed, no doors slammed, no announcement from a palace. He took away the comfortable arrangement where a 70-some man with a serious diagnosis signs what he is handed and is protected from the detail by people who love him and by people who benefit. The management stopped, and then one photograph got out. One frame, a long lens from the lane taken through a gap in the hedge on a gray afternoon. And it is not a scandalous picture at all. That is why it worked. A car at a gate, a young man in a dark coat holding a clipboard, a window half down, a woman in the back seat with her face turned away and her hand up near the glass. A picture editor in London looked at that and understood immediately what he was holding because the caption writes itself. By the following morning it was on a front page with 4 words under it about a queen being checked at her own gate. The story that ran was careful. It talked about a review of private arrangements. It used the phrase land registry, which is a phrase that has never once appeared in a headline about that family and did not need explaining to anybody because everybody in this country understands what it means when a house stops being in your name. It said the king had been unaware. It said the Prince of Wales had asked for the review. It quoted nobody, and it did not have to. And the reaction was not what the palace expected, and it was not what I expected either. Nobody cared about the £3 million, not a soul. One line went through that country like weather, buried down in the 4th paragraph about a man in his 70s in treatment, signing a check to protect a house that had already been signed away with nobody in his own household telling him, because every family in Britain has watched some version of that happen to somebody they love. The elderly father whose accounts are being handled, the mother who is protected from the detail, the paperwork moving around a person while everybody agrees they must not be worried by it. That is a story about your own uncle rather than a story about a king. and it landed exactly there. By the weekend, there was a woman standing outside the gates in London with a piece of card and a marker pen, and it said, "Tell him yourself." 3 words. She stood there for 2 hours, and then she went home. The photographers ran it everywhere, and the palace could not answer it, because answering it means confirming there was something to tell. The king made no statement. He carried out 3 engagements that week, and in the pictures from all 3, he looks exactly as he always looks, which is to say, polite and tired and slightly amused by something nobody else can see. He shook hands. He asked people about their gardens. Whatever happened in that sitting room stayed in that sitting room, and it will stay there because he is the last man in Britain who was raised to believe that is a virtue. And the new rule went in quietly, the way real rules always do in that family. Every private property arrangement across both households now runs through a single written schedule that goes to the king directly, not to the office, to him, dated, listed, and signed for. Any change of ownership involving anybody inside the family gets recorded on that schedule before it is executed rather than after. It is a dull, small, bureaucratic thing, and it is the most brutal document produced inside that family in a decade because of what it says between the lines about the last 20 years. The schedule exists because a page came out of a green folder on a kitchen table in Wiltshire. Now, let me finish where these things always finish for me. Some years ago, in a room at Kensington Palace, 2 boys were shown a list of their mother's things. Letters, jewelry, small objects with no value to anybody outside that family. All of it written down because Diana had worked out late and at great cost. That in that world, a thing is only yours if it is yours on paper. She had learned it the hard way. Her title was arranged around her. Her security was arranged around her. Her position was reviewed by men who called her ma'am while they did it. And by the end, she trusted a written page more than she trusted a promise made in a good voice. Her elder son learned that lesson at 15 in a dark suit, and he has never unlearned it. Every file he pulls, every date he checks, every time he asks who signed and when, he is that boy again, standing in a room where the grown-ups have already decided are now explaining it to him kindly. That is why this was never about a house in Wiltshire. His father has money enough to lose a house and never feel it. That was never the point. He was making sure that a man he loves did not spend the last part of his life the way his mother spent the last part of hers, which is to say surrounded by people being kind to him while the paperwork moved behind his back. And Camilla, who is not a fool and never has been, understood that better than anybody the moment she saw who was standing at her kitchen door and with a green folder and no witnesses, which is the family's way of saying, "This stops here, and it stops privately, and you will not be given the dignity of a fight." She is still in the house. She will be in the house next summer, and the summer after that, walking the dogs down the lane past the mill her husband bought with his own money for a view she had already promised to somebody else. Nothing about her days has changed at all. She has to say her name at the gate now and wait while a young man with a clipboard runs his finger down a list looking for it and finds it in the end. Further down under permitted occupants in the house she bought in 1996 to be the one place on earth where nobody could ever ask her who she was. She got her children out of the building before the door shut. Good for her. That is what a mother does. She forgot that the man holding the door open for her was standing there because nobody had told him what he was holding.